Hi junior hires, this video is the highlights for history, pages 228 to 232. So let's jump right into it. On page 228, we're looking at the world between the wars in this section. So find the bold term dictators and highlight the definition for that. Dictators are people who rule by force and do not allow their subjects any freedoms. Highlight Russia communism. Highlight this guy's name, Vladimir or Nikolai Lenin, and highlight that they built a cruel empire called the Soviet Union. Highlight businesses, homes, and land, and highlight when communism takes over a country, the government takes these things from the people and claims to own them. The people must work for the communist government or suffer great losses. So highlight that whole underlined section there. So they take all those things away. People aren't allowed to own their own businesses. They can't own their own homes or their own land. The people were allowed to vote, but they usually had only one candidate to vote for. Not much of an option there. Highlight this guy's name, Joseph Stalin. And he was one of the worst dictators that the world has ever known. He killed millions of people. He had them either executed or sent off to concentration camps in Siberia. Highlight Italy fascism on page 229. Highlight this guy's name, Benito Mussolini. And he was promising his people that he was going to protect them from communism with his own form of socialism, and that was called fascism. So find the bold term fascist party, and highlight that the people could own their own property, but they lost their freedoms. So that's probably the main difference between communism and fascism. They're all forms of socialism, which is lots of government control, less freedom for the people. But with fascism, the people were allowed to own their own properties. But Mussolini, just like Stalin, was quite fond of killing anybody who went against him. Next, highlight Germany, National Socialism. Highlight the Nazi Party and highlight Adolf Hitler. And find underneath Adolf Hitler, it's the start of a new paragraph. It says National Socialism, and it has a numbering of 3 things. We're going to highlight the first 2 things, so highlight this. National Socialism taught 1, that the leader and government of a country are all powerful and are more important than the people of that country. 2, that all people are not equal in worth, but some groups of people, such as Jews, especially Jews, are inferior. So highlight those 2 things. The third thing is that the leader could do no wrong. So Hitler was treated in a lot of ways almost like a god, and the people would worship Hitler in a way. They had songs that praised him, that praised his mighty leadership and his carrying the German people through a difficult time, and all in all, kind of worship songs to a man. So National Socialism, a dangerous movement, telling the people that they're less important, the government is most important, and there are people who are unequal to them. So direct opposition to the ideals set forth in the founding American documents that we've looked at, with the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that in the Constitution, it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The government gets its authority from the people don't get their worth from the government. But that's the opposite of what National Socialism was teaching. So turning the page to page 230, highlight Japan militarism. So we have communism in Russia, we have fascism in Italy, National Socialism, another form of fascism, in Germany, and militarism in Japan. So highlight this guy's name, Tojo. He was a general. Highlight that he became more powerful than the emperor. So militarism is rule by military leaders. So this General Tojo became more powerful than the emperor, the king of Japan. And the army had a lot of sway in Japan, and they wanted to reach out and conquer. So let's look now at World War II begins. Germany began to attack small countries in Europe. Italy attacked Ethiopia in Africa, and highlight that Japan attacked China. So if you look at our little map down there at the bottom, you can see Japan and the Pacific before World War II. So you can see the islands of Japan there, and then the area of China that they conquered Korea, and then a big chunk of China called Manchuria. And they were determined to get colonies that would expand their territories. As you can see, Japan's a pretty small island, and they wanted more land and more natural resources. Now let's look at Germany's conquests on page 231. So know the dates, they're underlined there. Highlight World War II, 1939 to 1945. And that really began when Hitler chose to attack Poland. He had taken many small countries in Europe by this point. You can see our map up there on the top of the page. Aggression Europe 1936 to 1940. So the green with the orange lines across it shows the conquest by Germany during this time. So they had taken Czechoslovakia and Austria, but when they attacked Poland, that's when the other countries of Europe said, okay, that's enough, we're not going to take anymore. Well, they didn't take any more, but Germany took more. So they took the Netherlands and Belgium and Luxembourg, Denmark, Norway, and ultimately France in 1940. See all those shown on the map there. Find the date, April 1940. April 1940, highlight that. This is when Germany attacked Norway and Denmark. They also defeated the countries of Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France, like we said. And highlight, Great Britain was the Nazis' last powerful European enemy that was not occupied by Germany. Great Britain begged the United States for help. So highlight all of that. Great Britain, tiny little island nation, standing alone against the might of Germany that had conquered most of Europe at this point, as we can see on our map. So the president of the States at the time, Franklin Roosevelt, was reluctant to jump into a European war, mostly because the people of the United States were reluctant to. Remember, they'd already fought in World War I, so they were saying, why should we fight another European war? We don't want to interfere with it. President Roosevelt called the United States the great arsenal of democracy, and they began to give war supplies to England. So let's look at Germany attacks Great Britain. Turn to page 232. Highlight Battle of Britain. And see a picture at the top of the page there of German bombers flying over London. Highlight that each day Hitler expected Britain to give up, but the people fought bravely, inspired by the leadership of their Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill. And he was a very, very special man, very courageous, and if it wasn't for his leadership, Great Britain probably would have collapsed very early into this Battle of Britain. But he kept the people going, he kept their courage up, their morale up, and they kept fighting on. Under Hitler surprises the Russians, highlight, even though Germany and the Soviet Union had signed a 10-year non-aggression, that means no fighting pact, in 1939, Hitler had been planning a surprise attack on the Russians. He'd been planning that all along. So highlight, in June 1941, Germany attacked the Soviet Union. Stalin now turned and asked for aid from Britain and the United States. So now the communists is asking for help from the free world. And they helped them in the interest of stopping the Germans. On the next column, under Many Wars in One, highlight Germany, Italy, and Japan were known as the Axis powers. Highlight that those countries that struggled against them were called the Allied powers or allies. So highlight Britain, highlight the United States, China, and many other nations joined the Allies. So this was truly, truly a whole world war. Fighting was taking place in Europe, in Africa, Asia, Australia, and dozens of countries ended up being pulled into the war. So we'll look more into this later on in the week, and those are all of the highlights for today. Make sure that you let me know if you have any questions. Make sure that you finish all of your reading and answer your questions. Have a great day, guys.